Good morning and welcome back to Wake Up America. The best-selling author, award-winning journalist, and college professor has found himself on the defense. That's because, I'm sorry, that was you.
No, we'll get to it. That's because several women have accused him of sexual harassment and bullying. And joining us now, the author of the memoir, Aftermath, When It Felt Like Life Was Over, is Alec Klein.
Alec, good morning. Thanks for being with us here on Wake Up America. The New York Post has got an article about your situation highlighting the accusations against you. And in this article, you say, quote, cancel culture is a phrase, but what happens to real people who are canceled? Even very high-profile individuals have, for the most part, just up and disappeared. It's dangerous. Anyone can get canceled over anything. It's the weaponization of the internet, and it's scary. So I want you to tell us what happened. And to be clear, you claim that nothing happened. You deny these accusations. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was a professor for about 10 years. And over those 10 years, I had evaluated anonymously by students, and never had I been accused of any kind of misconduct of any kind. But I was, in 2018, a former employee that I had let go led an attack at the height of the Me Too movement. And what was put out there publicly was wildly false. None of the complaints that were actually filed with the university had any kind of sexual interaction involved. There were a hodgepodge of complaints, but people didn't know about this. The complaints were about students complaining about their grades, for instance. They wanted A- instead of a B+. They complained about the chair that they sat in my office, saying that it was slightly lower to the ground than my chair, and they called it a power differential. There was a complaint about one student saying that I mocked her foreign accent while on a reporting trip to Florida. And I checked my records, and I wasn't actually on that trip to Florida. And so there were all sorts of complaints like this, but it didn't matter, because when you're accused of this kind of misconduct, it goes out there on the internet. It's like wildfire, and your life is utterly destroyed overnight, instantly. And that's what happened to me. I went through the process with the university, but I could tell you that I was never sanctioned, I was never fired, and I voluntarily resigned because it was so devastating to me and my family. My father tried to commit suicide in the middle of this. I wanted to die, frankly. And I can tell you, regarding that quote that you're talking about, I've talked to a lot of people who've been canceled. They've reached out to me over the past few years since this all happened. And what they described is what I've experienced, which is that when you're canceled, it's like murder. So you're socially murdered, so that you're essentially a pariah. You're cast out of society, but you're also professionally destroyed.
Right.
And so the question is, like, well, how do you move forward if you can't pursue your career, if you can't pursue social relationships?
So, Alec, let me ask you.
It's a really terrible thing to go through. It's like a 360 suffocation. And it's been now 3 years for me. And I kind of kiddingly call it the gift that keeps giving, because every day of my life, I'm dealing with this. And here we are still talking about it. And yet I do.
Alec, let me just stop you right there. I just want to. We have to give oxygen, obviously, to some of the accusations, because the number is high. It's not one person or two people even. Mm-hmm. So it says that you attempted to kiss a prospective employee. On the same occasion, you asked someone to smoke marijuana and ordered several cocktails. You asked a female employee to come to your hotel room for drinks on a business trip. You gave unwanted neck massages while a female employee was trying to work. You made sexually graphic remarks at work. You frequently commented on employees' attractiveness, appearance, and bodies. You sent texts intended for your wife to a female student, and you asked an employee if she was a stripper. Now, you deny that all of this happened.
Well, actually, those are all accusations, as I understand it, from one former employee. She was an administrative assistant who, in 2015, accused me of harassment. The university actually investigated those claims and ruled against her. They found that her claims were unsubstantiated, and that they actually caught her in a number of lies. And as a part of that, they actually told her that she couldn't even apply for another job at the university. As a part of that, the university ended up reaching a settlement with her for, I think, $5,000, in which she acknowledged that I did nothing wrong, and she would just, stop pursuing this.
Okay, Alec, I want to ask you, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to ask you, because you're kind of saying you got caught up in the Me Too movement, of course, which we've heard a lot about over the past couple years. Alyssa Milano, Rose McGowan kind of leading that. With these allegations that Rob just let off, obviously very different than a lower chair seniority in the office and mocking an accent. You're telling us what the university has done and that claim, but how are you defending yourself against those claims? Whether it is one student or 10 students, what's your defense on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, when this all happened, my defense was I was, face down in the rug in the dining room, and I was taking Xanax and drinking alcohol. So I wasn't really doing much of anything because it was so sort of, shocking and hard to believe that this was happening. So I wasn't doing much of anything. Over the course of the past 3 years, I started to write a book about this. Although I wasn't starting to write a book, I just was writing what I thought was a journal to myself because I'm a writer by trade. And then I realized that what I was doing was actually writing a story about what had happened. And that resulted in the book that came out earlier this year, Aftermath. But it was, frankly, not really intended to defend myself, but rather to explain what happened afterwards, which is, how do we deal with suffering? How do we deal with injustice? I mean, as you know, most of my career, or much of my career, I've been investigating wrongful convictions or false accusations. I've helped to set free a number of people who were in fact wrongfully convicted or falsely accused. And so there's this kind of, great irony that I suddenly find myself in the same situation. But,
I guess, Alec, I guess, and I just want to cut, just in the interest of time, I just want to jump in, and I do want to hear everything you have to say. The accusations that I pointed out come from more than one woman. It really doesn't matter, though, if it comes from one woman or more than one woman. In this case, it is multiple women. You're right. Northwestern said they were unable to substantiate. That's the exact language. They were unable to substantiate these claims. And you resigned. And I want to ask you about that. But basically, substantiating these claims turns into a classic he said, she said. There is no way to substantiate. Hold on. There is no way to substantiate something that is an accusation like that. And that's why people in power like yourself are able to do what they did. You're a journalism professor. Think about Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, and Bill O'Reilly, for example. They all have something in common, and that is multiple accusers, which makes it more difficult to defend. Unlike somebody like, say, Brett Kavanaugh, for example. We all saw Christine Blasey Ford speak before the Senate, and you know what? Brett Kavanaugh is sitting on the Supreme Court today because I don't think the American people believed her, and it's clear the U.S. Senate didn't believe her. So when it comes to multiple accusations, how do you defend against that?
Well, I think it's a great question because it's very difficult to prove a negative, right? And in fact, a lot of these accusations, and it's not just Me Too, it's this whole cancel culture, is based largely on numbers, which is to say that if you can get enough people to say negative things about you, there's sort of a whiff of like, is there something there?
Right, but why? What is the motive for these people, these multiple women, what was their motivation to do this? You seem like you were a fine professor, and you say it multiple times that the investigators ignored 10 years of your words, not mine, glowing evaluations by students. So why would they do this suddenly? Explain that.
I mean, it's a great question. I think at the height of the Me Too movement, there was this feeling like, if they wanted to go after people that they felt had done something wrong. Some of them were angry about their grades. Some of them were angry about that I had let them go as an employee. And I think the person who led the attack was frankly upset and angry over several years because she had been trying to take me down for several years in different ways and never succeeded. And I think so revenge is a great motivation for some people, not for me.
And we've seen disgruntled students, disgruntled employees. We've seen that in multiple cases. Now, you're saying that there's a bit of no due process. You're kind of saying you've been ruled in the court of public opinion with cancel culture, but there is due process. Do you wish this case had been heard in court? Do you think you'd be in a different position where you're not sitting here, talking about a book that you wrote after the fact, but you wouldn't have to talk about the after if there wasn't the before, of course. So do you wish it went to court?
It's a great question because as I investigate cases of people who are wrongfully convicted, the truth is that people who are charged with, say, murder have more rights than those who are accused of these kinds of misdeeds, if you will. There is a process, but in fact, the due process is lacking sorely because, for instance, they told me I couldn't have a lawyer present when I was being investigated. They didn't record the interrogations. I wasn't allowed to actually have a copy of that. I wasn't even given any documentation that I could keep. I couldn't even face my accusers in any way and understand what they were saying about me. So,
Alec, why would you resign? Why would you resign? If somebody at Newsmax accused me of sexual harassment and I was innocent, I would fight that until my dying breath. Why would you resign?
Well, I think that's an interesting thing that you're saying, because I wonder if that's really true, because in fact, you spend a huge amount of money on lawyers, and can you fight Goliath?
No, I'm familiar with how the legal system works, but this is my life, this is my livelihood, this is my family, this is my marriage, my kids. Everything I've worked toward is on the line. So I would see that through, and I don't understand why you would just resign and let this sort of play itself out wishy-washy.
I got to tell you, I think everyone reacts differently to, terrible situations. In my case, I just wanted to die. And that's, I didn't want to fight it.
You talk about your evaluations as a professor, and
Yeah.
by all measures that I've found, it seems like you were a sterling professor. You talk about what I cited earlier, these glowing evaluations. And I was thinking about that. Let's say that I was accused of, or let's say, all right, so I've been on TV now for more than a decade. You were a professor for more than a decade. If I just all of a sudden on the show tomorrow decided to spew out racial slurs and do something that was totally inappropriate, I would be judged for that, not my previous 10 years of wonderful work on television. I put quotes around wonderful. How is it different with you?
All I can tell you is that it doesn't matter what happened in the past under the way that these accusations are occurring now. Under cancel culture, accusations can be made right now against you, for instance, and it doesn't matter what your past record is. It's the fact that what goes out there is out there. I mean, frankly, I'm mostly worried about children who could be accused of all sorts of terrible things online as well. And what is their defense? There have been all sorts of examples of kids who've actually killed themselves and other people who've been utterly destroyed and ended their life because of these accusations.
Yeah, well, Alec, we appreciate your time this morning. You've been more than generous. America is a nation of people that have atoned and been given second chances and done a whole lot with that second chance. And you are right. There is gray area when it comes to cancel culture in this country right now, and that's something that needs to be looked at more closely.
Thanks for having me.
Newsmax TV is now America's fastest growing cable news channel. We give you the real news you need. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, share it with your friends. Newsmax TV streams live on YouTube for free. Newsmax TV, real news for real people.